Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest is Ethan Prochnik. Ethan is a writer, director, producer, entrepreneur, and inventor. His work has taken him aboard crab boats on the Bering Sea, featured on Deadliest Catch, undercover in Afghanistan investigating Al-Qaeda, into the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and inside prisons through a groundbreaking virtual reality documentary experience. His work has appeared on Discovery Channel, National Geographic, HBO, AMC, and many others, earning multiple Emmy nominations, a Producers Guild Award, and an Emmy Award. Today, Ethan has turned that same spirit of curiosity and innovation toward entrepreneurship as the founder of Kinshe, where he's combining mindfulness, sustainability, and design, including the invention of the world's first patented three-dimensional yoga mat. Throughout every chapter of his remarkable career, one thing that has remained constant is a willingness to immerse himself in unfamiliar worlds to better understand people, tell meaningful stories, and continually reinvent himself. Ethan, welcome to Expressions of Leadership. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, Ethan, you've lived an extraordinary life, but before we get into the adventures and the career, I'd love to start with your early years. When you look back at your childhood, what experience do you think shaped the person you eventually became?
So I grew up in Virginia and with free-range parents, and that definitely shaped a lot of my approach to new environments. You arrived there alone and you had to get out of there alone, whether it was running from a swarm of bees or tough kids on mini bikes. So that would be one thing, is just growing up with a free range, semi-rural childhood. And then the other thing that might have shaped my career is being the son of my father, who's this amazing guy who, as a child, escaped the Holocaust and then lived on welfare in Harlem and South Boston, only to go on to the Boston Latin School and Harvard. And when we grew up, we thought he was a diplomat, but when WikiLeaks came out, we discovered he was a spy, which was a family joke, but turned out to be true.
So officially, your father worked for the State Department on nuclear non-proliferation. But years later, it was revealed that he also had been working with the CIA. As a child, you knew he traveled constantly, but you didn't fully understand what he was doing. When did you begin to realize that there was much more to the story than you had known?
My father was a great guy and we were great friends, but as I look back, he was also never around. And he worked so much that I would say to my mom, like, where's dad? And she'd be like, oh, honey, don't you remember he's in Russia? But I wouldn't remember because, or Soviet Union back then. I wouldn't remember because I never really saw him anyhow. He was gone before I woke up, and he'd often come home after I was asleep. And I think some was probably generational, like the men went out and did their thing and weren't as involved with family life. And some was probably more along the lines of he literally lived a double life. And he always had an expertise in nuclear issues. He was literally a nuclear scientist, like the old adage. So he started working for the AEC, which was Atomic Energy Commission, prospecting for uranium. And then somehow he showed up on the radar as a diplomat working in nuclear non-proliferation. And my father had more than a few kind of incidents and stories which were a bit head scratchers. Like he seemed to always be where world events were taking really interesting turns and sometimes dangerous turns. So he was on site at Tiananmen Square And he was one of, I think, about 4 or 5 Americans who was sent to Chernobyl during the nuclear meltdown that could have caused, my understanding is, 2/3 of Europe to be covered with radiation.
Well, what was it like when WikiLeaks revealed that your father was indeed a member of the CIA?
It was jaw-dropping. And I should clarify, I think it was the CIA because we found a CIA anniversary mug in the attic. It could have been NSA or a number of other intelligence agencies. But basically, at the time, a woman was writing an article about me growing up called My Dad the Spy. And it was how these various mentors in my life had said my dad was a spy, but it was just a family joke. And if I said to my dad, "Hey, Dad, you've been in Tiananmen Square and Chernobyl and all these places, and I know a bit about politics, but for the life of me, I can't figure out what you do. Like you've never been able to articulate your job. Like, are you a spy? Are you CIA?" And he always said, "Well, Ethan, if I told you, I'd have to kill you." And so it was a family joke. And then it became a little bit more real when I worked for CBS News, and the investigative journalist there, Howard Rosenberg, who's a big deal investigative journalist, said, "What floor does your dad work on at State Department?" I said, "Third floor." And he said, "Well, that's a CIA wing." And this woman thought it was funny and began writing this article. And she said, "Well, I know for your family it's a joke, but have you ever looked up WikiLeaks, which had come out a couple of years before?" I'm like, "No." And so in real time, we went on WikiLeaks, entered his name, and he had page after page after page of his meetings with people like Iranian nuclear scientists, which, as you can guess, wouldn't just be a normal thing for an American diplomat to meet with an Iranian nuclear scientist. And so, in real time, while this woman was in the room, I called my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, you know you're in WikiLeaks." And he was like, "What?" And he goes, "Well, it looks like you met with this Iranian nuclear scientist named Mohammed, whatever his name was." And my dad is a really calm, cool guy, like a real life James Bond in persona, very charming, like just lost it. And I'd never seen him lose it. Kind of anger and upset, and how the hell do you know? And it was really unlike him. And then quickly, I realized he was so upset because he realized his sources had been compromised. So he was just crushed.
Well, you've spent your own career stepping into dangerous situations to pursue truth. Do you see a connection between your father's willingness to go where others wouldn't and the path that you ultimately chose?
Yeah, absolutely. It seemed in the realm of possibility, and the realm of the world of curiosity and excitement, that you could make a decision to go to a war zone and then go there. So maybe in the same way that a kid of a politician is like, "Yeah, I can run for office and become elected." I knew that these countries that for most Americans appear on the news are places you can go to and interact with the people, and um, in my case, tell their stories.
Now, you've also said that the truth is best found through immersion rather than observation. Where did that philosophy come from, and how has it shaped both your storytelling and also your own leadership?
I spent most of my life telling stories in an environment with, nowadays you'd call it, a lot of gatekeeping. So the gatekeeping was in the form of, if you embedded yourself with a special forces unit in Iraq, or if you were had taken birth on a Bering Sea crab boat, you had to gain acceptance from the people in your environment in order for them to be willing to tell your stories. Because if you came at it kind of like as a Hollywood type who was just diving in, interviewing them and flying off, they would either tell their stories in the form of bragging or they would shield their stories. And so if you wanted to get the truth, you had to sort of live their stories.
Well, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll explore how Ethan broke into network news, the unexpected opportunity that launched his career, and the decision after 9/11 that changed the direction of his work forever. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm speaking with Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, storyteller, entrepreneur, and inventor Ethan Prochnik about the experiences that have shaped his remarkable leadership journey. Ethan, you got your first break at CBS News in one of the most unconventional ways imaginable. Can you tell us that story?
Well, I was a bartender in DC when DC was murder capital of North America, if not almost the world. It was the height of crack cocaine, and the mayor of DC was filmed by the FBI smoking crack, and there the guns were plentiful and used daily. And so I was bartending in a pretty rough part of town in DC, and I was kind of in fear for my life a bit because on every now and then there would be some gunshots that would ring out in this club where I was a bartender. And at the same time, I would return home from that club very late at night, like when the club closed, so let's call it 4 a.m. And I'd walk past CBS News, and the guards there and I would always wave at each other. And eventually, this really sweet female guard is like, Ethan, you come on in. It's like raining out. Like, you come on in, you talk to me. And we became close friends, close 4 a.m. friends. And she said to me, she said, listen, you seem so smart. You know all this new stuff. You should meet Miss Harriet. Miss Harriet runs the night desk at CBS News, and this was network news. And so she introduced me to this woman who worked alone in the middle of the night, and I became her intern. And because there was no one else, at a really young age, I was actually sent on assignment because if news did happen at 4 a.m., Miss Harriet was stuck at the desk, so I would be sent to actually cover it with a camera team. And so that's how I got into hard news. And then eventually they hired me, and I stayed in hard news for a while and then got into entertainment, back and forth.
And as a young producer covering stories like Iran-Contra, what did you learn about persistence?
I guess with persistence, it was what I learned from this experience is I wasn't getting paid as an intern, even though I was the quote unquote producer covering these stories that happened in the middle of the night. And the persistence was just to keep at it when I wasn't making any money. And so I made my money from slinging drinks in this dangerous bar. And I just stayed at it for about a half a year till finally, some low position opened up. And I went to days and had a job, which was actually a huge step backwards storytelling wise, because working in the day, I was doing stuff like getting coffee, whereas when I was an unpaid cowboy at 4:30 a.m., I got to cover stories.
After 9/11, you left the security of network television and decided to bet on yourself. What made you willing to take that leap?
When I was young, in college, I made a few forays into various war zones, mainly on humanitarian projects. I went to Ethiopia during the time of We Are the World when they were experiencing famine. But then I just kind of was living my life and I went into journalism, but it was, all my assignments were in America. And then I went to work for E Entertainment on E True Hollywood Story and the Style Network. It's just how my life went. And then 9/11 happened. And I was in the middle of doing a documentary for E True Hollywood Story on Sonny Bono, and it just seemed really irrelevant. And that seemed irrelevant before, but then it seemed really irrelevant. So I called all my friends in hard news where I began and was like, I'll go over there, like send me on assignment. And they're like, get real. Every person who stayed in news, unlike you, is lining up for these assignments, to cover the various aspects of 9/11. And so I called up a bunch of publications, everyone from High Times, which wrote articles on marijuana, to ophthalmology magazines, and I strung together enough money to self-fund a trip to Afghanistan, and took off. And it was interesting. I do think I was one of the only Americans who went to Afghanistan the way I did, because most Americans came in through Pakistan and they had teams of like BlackRock security and local Afghanis and lots of AK-47s and so on as they rolled through Afghanistan on Winnebagos. And of course, I couldn't afford any of that. So what I did was I got smuggled in by a former CIA guy into Afghanistan through former Soviet Union. And I ended up living with an Afghan family as an Afghan. So I grew a beard and wore the Northern Afghani headwear, which allowed me to blend in. And that was my security. In a way, I still feel, I think I was maybe more secure than the guys in Winnebago's who maybe had a target on their back. By the time the Afghanis in a given town figured out that an American was in their midst, I was already out of there.
Throughout your career, you've earned the trust of people in very different environments, from Afghanistan and post Katrina New Orleans to fishing crews in the Bering Sea. Now, leadership and storytelling both depend on trust. In addition to immersing yourself into the environments of your subjects, how did you earn that trust with them? And what has it taught you about leading people and telling their stories?
I think trust is obviously important for every single type of relationship. And but it does play particularly strong when you're telling nonfiction stories, unscripted stories, because you have to, you're telling the stories of an environment, of people, a culture. And if they don't trust you, they're going to give the version they either think you want to hear or a version that advances their agenda. But if you really get them to trust you, then the stories they'll relate to you will come from their vulnerability. And that's usually where the truth lies. So my career randomly, because I don't think I'm particularly macho, put me in a lot of very male environments where there's a lot of kind of monkey tribe dynamics going on, of guys using their masculinity to jostle for position. And I knew I was really never going to win in that environment as a fellow monkey, because I was literally dealing with special forces or super tough fishermen, or people from these mind-bogglingly difficult jobs and environments. So what I could do to relate to them and tell their story is sort of share what they're going through, share their suffering a bit, and then be a place where they've trusted me so much and were comfortable enough that they could let down all their macho guard, which allowed for really interesting stories to come out. Because obviously, like, let's say it's a fisherman on the Bering Sea. When you first meet him, they're going to go, yeah, I went out and it was like 40 below and I killed it, got the crab right away. I was the first home. And that's the most boring type of story you could ever hear because it's just bragging. And if it was that easy and everyone could like become a millionaire, then everyone would do it. But really, what made them interesting is that they suffered and often failed. So classic hero's journey, they suffered and often failed and met monsters in their own psyche and literal monsters in the form of hurricanes and so on. And sometimes they got beat by the monsters, sometimes they didn't. And it was that vulnerable hero that became a more interesting character. So we took a lot of the basics of narrative fiction and basic hero's journey storytelling and applied it in real environments, extreme environments.
So, what have you learned from being in some of the world's most dangerous environments about human nature that you couldn't have learned any other way?
That's a great question. And I mainly think of Deadliest Catch for my answer is each crab boat that set out in these extreme conditions, life and death conditions, was a microcosm of family. And the skipper, the captain of these boats, was the leader. So you got to see very different types of leadership. So some of these guys who ran the boat ruled by fear, pure and simple, and some ruled by being so much better at being a fisherman than anyone on their crew that they earned respect that way. And some were kind of psychological experts themselves and had various tricks of how to motivate their crew through encouragement and also maybe making them feel off balance a little. And psychologically, I don't want to say manipulating, but yeah, maybe manipulating. Psychologically thinking a lot about who the people on their team were and how to motivate them. And so it was really great way in a really short time under very extreme conditions to experience and see a lot of different types of leadership, very different types.
Well, we're going to take a brief pause. Coming up next, we'll dive deeper into Deadliest Catch, one of television's most demanding productions, where leadership wasn't theoretical. It could literally mean the difference between life and death. Stay with us. Are you looking to connect with an audience passionate about leadership, growth, and success? Become a sponsor of Expressions of Leadership and align your brand with inspiring conversations that make an impact. Contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to explore sponsorship opportunities. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today my guest is Ethan Prochnik, whose career has placed him at the intersection of storytelling, leadership, and extraordinary human experiences. Ethan, Deadliest Catch became one of Discovery's most successful series. But behind the scenes, you were leading one of the most complex productions on television. What did leadership look like in an environment where hundreds of people depended on your decisions?
Deadliest Catch was, as far as I know, about as big a unscripted production as you could ever have because you were getting, um, thousands of tons of equipment from LA to a remote island on the Aleutian chain and then out into the Bering Sea, along with hundreds of staff people. So first off, it wasn't any single person's leadership. It was so each person had a realm that they were in charge of. And one of my fellow leaders, my boss, recognized I was pretty much useless at anything except being laser focused on story. And there I could lead. And I guess that's a type of leadership where you can really hold your own with anyone, and therefore you're going to get a certain amount of respect for this specific skill, whether you come across as a leader or not. And full confession, I often did not come across as a leader, having to do a lot with my ADHD and so on. But at the end of the day, I was laser on the show came out a story, and the story came out of these very small teams on 6 different boats. So approximately 12 to 18 people told the stories, and I was the leader of the story of them. And so every day they would call into me and deliver their story, and I would come up with a story that tied the whole season together. And they just knew I lived, ate, and breathed and really cared about their story and came at it as a supporter, which is one form of leadership and is the one that worked for me. So I supported them in every possible way for them to get the story that I thought the series needed. And whether that meant putting them on with my wife at the time because I hadn't spoken to a female for 2 months, or, and supporting their psyche, or just by caring so much about some obscure story they cared about with what the child of a skipper was going through. They just knew I cared and I supported, and they killed themselves for me getting the stories that ended up being aired. 15,000 hours of footage eventually became about 16 hours. And so that was the type of leader I was for this particular show, whereas other people were the more traditional leaders doing speeches on hillsides where the production crew was told, this is your last chance to head back. No shame. But beginning tomorrow, you're out on a boat. Never really quite worked because we had a lot of people bail even after they headed out on the Bering Sea. But it was fun to watch and sounded like Patton rallying the troops. And that was a form of leadership. But it wasn't my form on the show.
You've been very candid that your leadership style during those years was intense. Looking back now, what would you do differently as a leader?
Everyone who worked on that show had an impossible task, whether they were on a boat facing down a hurricane or trying to wrangle 15,000 hours of footage into 16 hours of footage. It was all impossible. And I think one of my biggest mistakes where I wasn't a great leader is just thinking you could do it all. You couldn't. And luckily, I had colleagues and really bosses. There's like a leadership team that I was probably on the bottom of the team, even though I was the head of story. And that team, I spent a lot of time watching a guy named Jeff Conroy be a leader, and he was really good at not getting lost in the weeds and allowing people to do their thing. And he realized that you couldn't micromanage a project with hundreds of hours of footage on a given day. So he realized you had to sit back and delegate. And so when you say, what would I change is just having that like bad, probably generational feeling that you got to do it all. It's a really poor approach to leadership. And I was utilized well on the show because he, as much as possible, kept me on laser focused on story, which was smart. He had people do what they could do best.
We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll explore what happened after Deadliest Catch, why Ethan decided to build his own production company, how success unexpectedly unraveled, and how those experiences ultimately transformed the way he leads today. We'll be right back. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today we're talking with Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and entrepreneur Ethan Prochnik about reinvention, resilience, and what leadership looks like after success and failure. After the success of Deadliest Catch, you decided it was time to build something of your own, and you co-founded Undertow Productions. What was the vision you had for that company?
I got to be honest, there wasn't a great vision like a mission, and that probably was a problem for the company. My co-founder of the company mainly, he was a better leader of teams than I, but he mainly came out of story. And I think the impetus was we were tired of working for other people and just wanted to work for ourselves. And I don't think that vision is large enough to keep a company going. And the company eventually went under. After some great successes and interesting storytelling, we disappeared into the dust heap of unscripted storytelling in LA. Is we should have had more of a mission and a specific larger goal.
And you've described the collapse of Undertow as one of the happiest days of your life. That's probably not what people expect to hear. Can you tell us more about that?
The reason why the implosion of Undertow was one of the happiest days of my life is I'd spent the last 2 years trying to be the type of leader I couldn't be, that didn't play to any of my strengths and played to all of my ADHD weaknesses and failing. And so the day the company imploded, I suddenly felt that I had been landed back in, like in a time portal, back into my shoes, back out of trying to be this sort of pattern leader of hundreds of employees on a given day, back into I could just be a storyteller. Like I've been faking it and really killing myself, trying to be the type of leader I wasn't and failing.
I'd like to shift to a discussion about ADHD. And you said that you were diagnosed with that later in life after your child was diagnosed. What did that diagnosis help you understand about yourself?
It helped me understand literally everything. It was like there's this movie, The Usual Suspects, about 20 years ago, where at the end of the movie, you realize that the mastermind of this given caper was the last person you thought it was. But once you realized who it was, Kevin Spacey, everything in the movie made sense. And that's exactly how it was discovering you were ADHD and realizing it's an actual condition is like it explained high school to me, explained fights, it explained relationships, is everything became recontextualized over a month. And I'm still kind of figuring it out. And my successes in life were where ADHD as a superpower was working, and my failures in life was where it wasn't. But it was all random because I had no understanding of my own mind. So I don't pretend to be able to really say this is how to be a leader, but I will say understanding yourself and your own authenticity is the building blocks of being the leader you are capable of and the most inspiring leader you can be.
And when you say that ADHD has been your superpower, how has it changed the way that you lead?
I have to do a caveat there. ADHD can be a superpower if you have a deep understanding of your own mind and how to use it. Otherwise, in my life, it's mainly been an albatross because I had no clue why I had 1,000 thoughts at a given moment or different directions, which when I was able to hyper focus like on storyboard, great, because I was able, my brain could take in millions of stories, probably literally, and chart a path of what I felt the best story was. But if you aren't playing to your superpower or to a particular strength, then it's just the chaos of a bunch of voices in your head, which is how I think I actually lived most of my life, except when it came to story. And also, I think I knew how to get other people to be good storytellers. I think I'm a teacher. So I was able to be a really good supporter when it came to serving that cause, a larger cause of compelling, truthful storytelling. But when I didn't have the larger cause, it was just a bunch of chaotic voices and my various team members getting exasperated with me because I was all over the place.
Let's now pivot into your latest entrepreneurial endeavor. After decades of success in television, many people would have just been content to retire. Instead, you reinvented yourself by founding Kinshe, an earth-friendly wellness company that offers sustainable yoga products. And you invented the world's first three-dimensional yoga mat. What inspired that transition, and what problem were you trying to solve?
Well, the way it ties into storytelling in these extreme environments is I was often in places that didn't have gyms or studio yoga classes, such as Afghanistan or Iraq or the Bering Sea or the Sharky waters off of Cape Town. But what I could bring along is a yoga mat. So personally, I'm not one of those people who can make their body into bows and be super flexible, but I'm someone who needs yoga to center themselves in extreme environments. And so that's how I got into yoga. It was the only way for me to bring a little center to my life, as well as just an attempt to keep in shape in places that didn't offer a lot of opportunities for either. And so that's how I got into yoga. And then when the pandemic hit, overnight, my world of travel and that type of TV disappeared. And then TV in general was simultaneously disappearing as people went to things like YouTube. And I just saw that that world was gone. And there's no way that I was going to emerge from the other side of the pandemic and get right back into the grind of intense television storytelling. And I also had lost my spark to do it anymore. And you really need to have that spark ignited if you're going to give up your life for this type of difficult storytelling, which is movies and TV. So as I traveled with my yoga mat, part of having an ADHD brain is you shamelessly think anything can be improved. And you're usually wrong, but sometimes you're right. And so as I would stare across a tent in Fallujah which was in Iraq, at my yoga mat, I'd be like, why is it flat? I'll slip on it. And Iraq that summer was 125 degrees, so extra sweaty. And I'm like, what if it had ridges on either side? Or what if it was three-dimensional? And then that sort of questioning of anything and everything led me to learn that flat yoga mats aren't an ancient Indian Hindu secret. They were invented by a British woman whose father-in-law, British or German, I forget, whose father-in-law was a rug merchant. And she had cut these rectangles out of the pads that go under rugs. And those were the first yoga mats. And so if you think about it, if you took a given 10 yogis, they'd probably tell you some story about how it is following some tradition of evening out the planes of the earth and centering. But honestly, it was this woman who realized that these rug pads were good at kind of not being slippery and cushioning these difficult asanas. And that's how yoga mats were invented. And no one's really thought to rethink them or improve them since. So that was the original mission, was kind of to build a company around an invention. But then during COVID, manufacturing and so on ground to a halt as international shipping ended and Chinese manufacturing became hyper difficult when it used to be super simple. And so just wanting to keep the gears moving, we became a brand and rethought every common yoga product, both to be sustainable, and we're definitely not the only one doing that. There's a few sustainable yoga companies who are largely sustainable. I do believe we went the extra mile and care about even if the manufacturer making a given item is treating their workers right and that type of thing. But we also rethought every common yoga item in really practical ways, such as most yoga straps are made out of nylon, which is a petroleum product. So if you think about it, that's a real contradiction. Not a contradiction in terms of, it's a contradiction in philosophy. On one hand, yogis are in touch with the earth and care about that type of thing. On the other hand, in the corner of almost every yoga studio in LA are a bunch of petroleum product straps hanging from a plastic hanger. And there's the most common yoga mat materials, PVC, which is the most toxic form of artificial rubber. It's not recyclable and it leaches into your bloodstream. And so we just rethought everything from both a sustainable point of view and also, let's say we got a yoga strap to do everything a nylon strap can do and be sustainable. That was only the beginning of the journey. Like, what else could a yoga strap be? Well, a yoga strap could be antimicrobial. So what materials are antimicrobial? Hemp is. So hemp is a fabric. So a yoga strap could be hemp. So Kinshe's yoga straps are hemp because they're antimicrobial and they're sustainable. And per square acre, hemp's gonna suck out more CO2 by far than even other organics like cotton, right? And so we just went through every item from yoga blocks to our mats to our towels to think of how to reinvent, reimagine, and elevate. And getting back to leadership for a second, groupthink kills the outcome of leadership. Too much groupthink, right? Too much consensus. Sometimes you just have to ask the really dumb question, which is, why are yoga mats flat? And then be utterly agnostic and curious and without an agenda to answer the question you ask.
Well, building Kinshe has been a very different leadership challenge than producing television. How has entrepreneurship and your yoga practices changed the way that you lead and make decisions?
Being an entrepreneur and being on my own timeline allowed me to not feel this weird cultural pressure to make things happen on arbitrary timelines. So in some ways, we're moving slower than if we had someone who's a little bit more type A moving things along. But in some ways, we've discovered a lot of things along the way to create the best yoga products we could possibly create. And a lot of people say things like that, but I promise sincerely when we say we feel something is fulfilling its purpose in a better way, it comes from a lot of thought. And taking the TV deadlines out of my life allowed me to kind of ease into a type of leadership style that feels more authentic and calm and won't kill me by the time I'm 65.
We're going to take one last break. When we come back, we'll look ahead to Ethan's vision for the future, the legacy he hopes to leave, and we'll wrap with some wisdom and whimsy. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm joined by Ethan Prochnik as we explore the future he's building through innovation, mindfulness, and purposeful leadership. What excites you most about the future for Kinshe, for storytelling, and for the impact that you hope to make?
What excites me about Kinshe as a yoga company is it's bigger than commerce and fashion. It really is there really is a larger picture that I can get with. Because I always cared a ton about the environment. Like my dad was into solar when I was 6 years old, and the only solar panels in the nation were on Jimmy Carter's White House roof. And I always cared a ton about the environment, and I'd been all over the world and had a real appreciation for the natural wonders of the world and how fast they're disappearing. And it feels really right to have a company whose one of its primary drivers is to be sustainable and to care about these things. And then I also like invention, the problem solving. It feels really at home. It feels weirdly like a lot of what I've done in the past in storytelling, but instead of creating a story that's watched on TV, you're creating a story that can be felt in the texture of a given yoga item or in the intention behind that item or even in the colors. And ADHD people like myself can really obsess over certain things, and that works when you start a brand. I honestly drove my assistant at the time, Janelle, insane because I spent 3 days, 8 hours a day choosing the color green. So the first day was ordering us every type of green swatch known to man. And then the other 2 days were mixing and matching them until the red, green, blue aspect of every color on God's earth came together in something I like. And so obsession and having a larger purpose is really working well. And I feel I'm where I should be. And I'm making a product that I'm entirely proud of rather than proud of through a consensus. Like this is the best product that can please a television network and my team members and myself. This is just like, how can I please myself, but also reach a larger goal than myself? And that just feels really right and gets me really pumped for the future. And I don't know why I didn't retire. I could have. I was incredibly lucky with the stock market because I'm an idiot. I can't even read a bar graph when it comes to day trading or a candlestick graph or whatever they are. But maybe I just need the dopamine.
So when people look back on your work decades from now, what do you hope they'll say about the way you led and the lives that you've touched?
I think me and a very small number of storytellers figured out a very cool way to do unscripted storytelling where you didn't just go fly on the wall, which for years documentary filmmakers were like, just be a fly on the wall, don't do anything, and then you'll get all the truth. And it's like, yeah, maybe if you have the luxury of, let's say, 5 years of shooting and you're rich and you have a bunch of endowments from PBS, you can just have some cameras on the wall and eventually find your story and it'll have a lot of truth in it. But in TV, it just doesn't work that way. You have to find that truth faster. And so I do think that Deadliest Catch led to storytelling that often was more truthful than a more pulled back way of telling stories. Like we pushed it a bit, but we pushed it to get the truth because we acknowledge the inauthenticity of having a camera in an environment, period. It makes people a little bit fake. They're a little bit conscious. And so how do you get the truth when they know that? So that's storytelling. And then it's just, storytelling, the stakes and emotion is, I teach storytelling, always have. And how do you chart between the literally millions of infinite stories of a given day? Like, do I walk out my door? Do I get married? Do I buy a dog? It's infinite, right? And if you follow emotion, you'll tend to have compelling stories. And with my yoga company, which is definitely my passion for some time to come, it is to just ask the dumb questions. How can something be better? Then vision this better thing, and then be willing to go through the agony of getting there. Those are the legacies and my path.
And where can listeners learn more about Kinshe and follow up with everything you have coming up?
Well, if you're interested in my yoga company, go to kinsheyoga.com. KINSHE yoga.com. Kin as in kinship, she as in the feminine Mother Earth, kinship with Mother Earth. Kinsheyoga.com. Go there. And I sincerely believe you'll find the most sustainable, innovative yoga gear out there and beautiful.
And now it's time for our wisdom and whimsy segment of the show, where I get to ask the guest one advice question and one fun question. Starting with the advice question, what's one leadership lesson that you had to learn the hard way that you hope the next generation of leaders won't have to?
I guess one lesson and mistake I constantly made throughout my career is be willing to pull all the way back and get the big picture. Because if you're just grinding day to day and fighting brush fires, one, you'll be miserable, and two, your outcome won't be optimal.
And now for the fun question. You spent your career documenting extraordinary people. If someone were making a documentary about you, what would you hope the title would be and why?
He was annoying with a purpose. And the why would be is I think I've exasperated everyone in my life at a level that is, to be honest, above average. But it's not to power trip and it's not to be arbitrary. I really am looking for optimal outcomes that enhance a product or the world or both.
Well, Ethan, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom and your leadership with us today on Expressions of Leadership. Whether following stories into conflict zones, leading teams under extraordinary pressure, or reinventing yourself as an entrepreneur, you've shown that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing yourself, continually learning, and creating conditions for others to share their stories.
It was fun. I appreciate you, Michele.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe and share this episode with someone who would appreciate Ethan's remarkable journey and insights on leadership. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, reminding you that leadership isn't defined by the titles we hold or the places we go. It's defined by our willingness to step into the unknown, to keep learning, to keep growing and to help others thrive. See you next time. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.